to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. Ladies and gentlemen, in this episode, I have a discussion with a school teacher in Florida who has over a decade of experience teaching in multiple states, as a matter of fact, in both classrooms and as an administrator, along with the public school system and the Catholic school system. What he describes regarding both systems and their similarities and differences is very, very interesting, to say the least. It's a frightening scenario that's clearly designed to withdraw the family from the education of the child and ultimately withdraw the actual education from the child themselves as well. He also describes how decentralization is the way forward, and I agree with him wholeheartedly, as I'm sure much of this audience does as well. We briefly discussed some of the mask-related issues that occurred, although he lives in Florida, so they didn't quite have the problem. But he's well aware of what's going on nationwide, and again, we discuss a variety of different subjects. So give this a listen, share it wherever you can, and I'll catch you on Friday.
I'm like a traditional Latin Mass Catholic. So we're like the redheaded stepchildren of a lot of dioceses. And it's actually why I left a perfectly fine position at a nice little cute rural Catholic school. I was a principal. But it was frowned upon for me to go to this Mass that's literally about 2,000 years old, roughly. It's got all the bells and whistles, and I saw the fruit with my children immediately, even when they were youngest toddler. The pastors and priests are typically dynamite. You can count on them. They show up. They're very manful. It's really missing in our society. So I'm not at a Catholic school right now, just because they probably wouldn't have me, regardless of how much experience I have, or what kind of point of view I have of Catholic education. I feel that Catholic education is a real true education, just because if education is centered on objective truth, which and I'm not trying to cause any offense or anything, but objective truth in itself as Christ, that's a pretty darn good foundation, starting point. So, the good, the beautiful, all those things that we should be, we should present to our children, our students, the world. Even it's what should be happening, but Catholic schools are kind of just going the same way that the public school down the street is going. But the problem is the Catholic school charges a tuition, and when you're offering the same exact thing for free down the road, most of the time with sports and all these other nice bells and whistles, then it's definitely the Catholic school is going to fail every time, and that's been the story ever since somewhere around the '60s. But as far as me working in education, I've been in education, public and private, mainly Catholic and just public schools, middle schools, for about 12 years, which these days is, I've been able to hang on and have varied positions throughout a couple of different systems and dioceses and districts and states, and always kind of fallen back to it. But every time, no matter what state, district, or diocese, I just come up against the same kind of monolithic thinking that is essentially failing our students and failing these systems as a whole. So
It's depressing, isn't it?
It is, and it's hard. Like the last, I have a good friend that lives close, and I was thinking I'd moved back down to Florida, and I'd gotten a public school job just to make that. I mean, it's great to be able to plug into that anywhere, and there's openings everywhere, and even if I didn't have experience, people would take chances, just because the system is showing some severe weakness in that area. So it was easy to get into that gig, but if it's the wrong school or wrong administrators, if the culture of the school is just teachers are eating each other left and right, and miserable. It's not somewhere where you can really be at peace and thinking about the education that you're attempting to provide. So we found that when we moved back down to Florida, it was a little. That was 2019. It was a little. It was quite a stretch for me to remain there, make so little money. My wife stays home with our kids, and we homeschool. But because she's an ex teacher too, and I have a master's in education, so it's. I mean, we're fully capable of teaching our own children. Um, and we actually enjoy it, having that autonomy. Um, anyway, long story short, we came back. It was really depressing coming back after being in Catholic school for 6 years straight. Because Catholic school, the dioceses had their own issues, but it certainly was delightful to be able to speak those objective truths and to have the reins as a principal. I mean, I had teachers who, I mean, I was like 35 years old, something like that, and I had teachers who had been teaching longer than I was alive. And there's no way, as an administrator, I'm going to walk into that class of that kindergarten teacher who can literally teach dyslexic children how to read, and knows every little trick in the book to get them there in kindergarten. There's no way I'm going to walk into her classroom and say, you know what you need to do is there needs to be more schoolwork up on the wall, and give them advice. Like I just never assumed, you know, I assumed I was there as a resource, and I assumed I was there to keep the place, the lights on, the heat on, and to make sure that we're all functioning as a team, helping with that culture. But there's no way that I could consider myself the expert for the teacher in the room, um, unless they were really inexperienced, and I could give them some pointers. But I'm usually hiring the person to do the work, so why would I want to, really get in there? And I just want them to be comfortable, really.
I'm
And
gl-
that's really missing too.
I'm glad. Oh, I agree, and I'm glad, and you can elaborate on it. And I want you to. I'm glad you mentioned that because what you just said is a perfect example of, in my opinion, of a quality of an actual leader. Your ability to actually recognize that fact and then know to essentially stay away. Whereas other administrators really suffer from narcissistic personality disorder. And they enter those environments and they try to micromanage everything, and they end up destroying their any reputation that they may have had because again they step on the wrong toes.
Right, and they're only there for 3 or 4 years tops, and they're moved on, and that doesn't even matter because it's usually it's the accreditation firm that the place is actually linking in with, or all these guardrails are in education to keep everybody just moved towards this constant progress that really has shown never to work. So yeah, I was always leery of all that, especially as a teacher. I remember the secretary of the school, and I mean, the secretary is like the brains of the operation. Like they can connect all the dots constantly.
Yep.
And so I always made sure that, I mean, she was the one to take it. If she liked chocolate, she needed chocolate. Anyway, she asked me like one of the first times we met when I took the reins of the school, and she was like, "Are you going to change anything?" And I was like, "No, I'm not going to change anything." Like we're not going downhill. It's a nice little school, 70 kids. It was great. It was like a family. So I that first year I got to hang back and kind of hide away and keep things moving and just kind of observe. And there was a couple of things that needed to be dealt with, but none of it had to do with personnel, and none of it really had to do with the actual education that we're giving them. Because there's so much more to education than just a curriculum. And no matter how much they talk about not teaching the test, it's exactly what we do every single time. Um, because it's an outcome based education is just that way. You want a certain outcome. Um, so it's a constant argument. So I think public and private, they're suffering from the same thing. It's a bureaucratic problem. It's a top down mentality. Um, when the most important person in the school is the teacher. They're they are the gateway for the knowledge to come. And I do kind of, I fall to more traditional. I'm a history teacher at heart, so my special superpower is I can just put people to sleep immediately when I start talking. But I think the traditional way to teach history, not this applied history, but just saying I have knowledge in my brain and I'm a master of a lot of that knowledge and I can tell stories, and then I'm going to show you examples by story of actual humans that have come before you that made all the mistakes that you're going to make. They've done these tremendous and awesome historical things, that are offered to you to do. It's just a totally different, it's not the Ferris Bueller, thing where it's just boring as heck and it's lecture. And no, you can still be pretty entertaining if you're telling a story that you're really on fire about. So coming from the social sciences in general, I just think, making it this applied stuff and really tamping down on the curriculum. And then when you look at the world history books, I mean, I think I spent one of the years 12 weeks on China, and I spent 2.5 on Rome and 1.5 on Greece. Like these ridiculous, obviously, who's making these textbooks like like that? It's important to know the world, but for goodness sakes, Greece and Rome have a heck of a lot more to do with the United States of America than the history of China. No disrespect. It's just
you're right.
It's gonna always be political, and it's always gonna zero in on stuff that just it doesn't need to clutter the classroom. So that I've always considered the teacher to be number one, and that fits with the Catholic thing too. When we kind of dig into the state of Catholic schools in a little bit. There's a lot on that subject that the teacher is the most important. And when I read that, I was like, well, of course it's not the curriculum, and of course it's not the method. It's the person who is building a relationship with the other person. That's going to be the most, and for better or worse, really, when it comes down to it. These days, it's the teacher that's most important. So anyway, these bureaucratic states, both Catholic and public, it's all about data, but they always do data. I just don't trust data. I think science has taken a hit with all this COVID stuff. I think medicine's taken a serious hit, and I think data, just the you can tweak it for whatever you want. You can make anything look like anything you want at any time, and I think that's a dangerous way to bring kids up. And especially when half the time that data says that we should be going back to more traditional principles in teaching and running a school and that sort of thing. I think the main problem was centralization, all the power at the top away from the teacher. And I'm not even a union rep or a union member, but I argue that the teacher being the most important, it's not even a matter of money. It just should be obvious in every district you go that the superintendent is not the person who you do a dog and pony show for. The student is. The parents are the ones that you're trying to make a connection for. The parents have hired you, not the district, not the school board, even though that's legally how it's kind of set up. So the centralization, I think, has really ruined a lot of things, not just education, even just everything. I mean, you can think about really, even medicine, the hyper specialization and the centralization of all. You got one person calling the shots for hundreds, if not thousands, of professionals who have functioning, working brains, and then the bureaucratic state in medicine, hospitals. That's what kept a lot of that initial treatment stuff from the public view. They just said, we're just going to stick them on a ventilator and give them water, and we'll hope for the best. When they could have been giving them 20 different things, and fixing it right off the bat. That's how a teacher should be allowed space too. It's the administration, I think, gets in the way for as much as they want to be a resource, or they feign that they're a resource or something like that. They really do kind of muddle everything up and keep everything standardized. Anyway, that I back in the day, I had a bigger chip on my shoulder, so I looked into kind of the science of leadership in districts and stuff, and it's really interesting when you think. What I found is the further away the professional is from the child, the more money they make, but the less they have in actual effect on the student success.
Yep.
I tried to find some of the studies that I'd come across. The only one I could find was, teachers were about 44% as far as influence on the academic success of the pupil. The school-based administrators was around 30. The district was around 19, and superintendent was at 3%. Has a 3% effect overall on student achievement.
And I'll tell you what, I would go further with that, and I'd say they're being generous, and it's quite possible that study was manipulated.
Yeah, well, and it was the I think it's AASA. It's the Association of Something Superintendents of America.
Oh, well, there you have it.
So yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's like Nike did a study about their tennis shoes, and everybody likes Nikes.
Yeah,
okay,
everybody loves them, and it doesn't matter that they're made by children and that get paid 3 cents a week or whatever it is. Even if it's $1 a week. And this is just standard operating procedure for us these days, and we allow things like that, but then we just don't see the whole pie. This globalism thing that they're trying and they're succeeding very well at is just not something that's very practical, and in fact it's quite inhumane sometimes. Anyway.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. This is an example I've brought up on the podcast in the past, on at least 2 or 3 occasions. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I either read from this study a little bit, but I certainly brought it up. When I was in graduate school, it was after graduate school, I came across this, and it blew me away. And it, of course, never surprised me when I read it, because this was something that was pushed on all of us when I was a school teacher. It made 0 sense. I knew it made 0 sense. It felt wrong in every part of my body. And it was a study that proved, beyond a reasonable doubt, that, and it was a in-depth, quantitative, peer-reviewed study. At least 3 authors. They came up with putting number values with the practice of having school teachers review standardized test scores of their students. And their conclusion was that regardless of the amount of time that school teachers were told to consistently log in and review the standardized test scores of their students, that it had as much impact on student success and student grades, including their standardized test scores, as it would on the student's height.
That is insane.
Yeah, which means, again, I love it, but it just proves, of course, that it does nothing. And so one of the unfortunate things that occurred where I taught in Florida was that the district created this giant algorithmic system, this chart program, basically, where we would have to log in as teachers and look at the test scores, the standardized test scores from the previous year of just our homeroom students, which were students that we didn't even have in class, that we didn't even teach. But they just wanted us to look at them. And so what they would do is they would track the amount of time that teachers were logged into that system. And if they would basically surveil them. And if they weren't logged in long enough, they would use that against them in their evaluation.
yeah, and it's just it boggles the mind who comes up with this stuff. Like who else is sitting in the room thinking like this? Not even a logistical thing, but this just doesn't make any sense that it would actually make it would have any effect in a positive way on the schooling of kids when you don't think of the blatantly obvious, you know, bring teachers up in a way that they feel they can actually teach and they can actually not have to, submit to these controls and things. Um, because I was listening to one of your podcasts and it was like the same thing, and this hasn't happened until this past year. You get nostalgic sometimes, and I think back when I first started teaching, and I did ESE first, and because that's kind of getting your foot in the door. But then I was kind of drawn towards administration, so I did like behavior coach and intervention specialist and things like that. But it's all paper trail anyway. And then on top of that, they treat ESE kids, instead of pinpointing what's actually going on with the ESE kid, they just kind of actually keep them in school regardless, and there's no other placement. They, instead of having places for them to go other than these, nonviolent crisis intervention, basically borderline juvenile detention facilities, um, no actual no actual therapeutic, this is what you're going to be expected of in future, as an adult, and we should probably work towards this. It was always this, theoretical stuff, but it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. So I started with ESE. I got into that stuff. um, Left to go to Catholic education. It was better. It was definitely better. The first principal, we were allowed a lot of space. She was very confident in how she led. She didn't really look. Some administrators, they get a school and they got to immediately put their imprint on the school. Um, so it's like a flavor almost. And like I said, I've never really been like that. But you get nostalgic when you think about some of these things, some of these past jobs I had. But when I started teaching again this fall, I took a couple years off and did some private things for fun, and that didn't pan out 100%. But I got to start a business, and I got a lot of extra experience working for a friend of mine, and so it was good. It was definitely worth it. But when I came back to education, I was like, this is exactly what I need to do. This is I was born to do this. And that one of your podcasts, I don't know which one it was, but because I've been trying to play catch up and stuff. But it literally is you. That's what you said. You feel you were put on planet Earth to do this, and to think that you have to walk into this classroom and there's all these diktats from on high that are making you miserable, and you don't even. I mean, it's like you don't even want to show up for work some days because your third period or fifth period or whatever, there's all these discipline issues, and you like the kids and you hope the best for them, but it's like, I mean, it's not like this is crazy awesome money. It's not like, if I feel that I was born to do this, I think they put up a certain amount of hurdles to kind of, cover all the inexperienced. Maybe they could even feign that it was for the inexperienced, but at some point you got to say, man, I got this guy who's been in education for 12 years, and he's licensed in the state of Florida to basically teach any subject in middle school minus, PE and music. I think I should allow him some space since he wants to hang around. I think I should allow him, maybe he knows something about history, even though he's got a history degree. And, I mean, when we're not allowed to be masters of the subjects, or just masters of our classroom within reason, it's always going to turn out poorly. I feel there's got to be some space at some point.
Yeah. I worked with a guy who had 7 master's degrees.
7 master's degrees. Oh
He
man.
he taught geography. and
Man.
and he got his master's degrees in almost every subject that you could teach in school, and he did it for that reason, and then he did it for the reason of being able to cover the point system that's necessary to maintain your certification.
Mhm.
So he sort of was double dipping from certainly an intellectual standpoint, but no one knew he had 7 master's degrees until the day he retired. And
Man.
they were doing one of those, we're going to miss you, glad you worked here kind of things. And they were running through his resume, the person who was, introducing him and talking to him, or, talking to the group about him, and what he had accomplished throughout his career. And I mean, you could have heard a gasp in the room. But I mean, you're dead right. It's that kind of stuff that no one seems to give a damn about, and the fact is they don't.
Right.
You're a cog in the wheel, and
Right.
the last thing they want is you acting like you're the wheel.
Right. Right. Um and currently, I'm in a decent district. You know, when I look at the districts around the counties, I have reasonable administration. But because I'm first year in this county, they are giving me some extra workshops and whatever. So I was actually at a school, and I was watching other teachers do their thing, and just how the other teachers in the downtime were talking to the other new teachers. Because I was, I did alternative certification. I had a history degree, went through alternative certification, then went for masters in education after that. But the way those people were talking about the students, and the just the vocab. I'm like, are we even speaking English right now about these children who are faced um, with with this crazy world that we have right now? Are we even, we're talking about, fluency and all these different things and all this data and that data, and it's like, no, I mean, we're teaching children, and we want citizens. We don't want these cogs. That's because that's what they want the students to be too. They want the cogs for the society. And that's at its inception. The modern schooling system
Yep.
is set up for that. It was the robber barons and the industrialists who they wanted factories, but the problem is, they moved those factories overseas. Now we got the system still, and there's no place for them to go. So, delinquency, and I mean, it's bonkers that we're just gonna pedal to the metal on this. And I mean, I wouldn't have said this a couple of years ago, but I mean, we might witness the entire system failing. And I mean, that's hard to believe. I mean, where would the kids go? What would that even look like? But I mean, in a couple of counties over, I think they they might even have just like a handful of janitors. I think like a majority of the teachers are sweeping and mopping and cleaning their rooms. And I mean, with our school, and it's a decent district in a decent little town. I mean, we're talking there's at least 3 or 4 buses that are doing 2 runs in the morning and the afternoon because they don't have enough bus riders. So they drop, a bunch of kids off about 20, 30 minutes early, and those kids are roaming the school and going and getting breakfast and stuff. And then they go back out and get another run. And that's how they've done it at nearly every school across the district. So that's how they're going about fixing this problem. They're just gonna kind of have everybody do double the work. And I don't know how long that's gonna last. Um, it just doesn't. It just doesn't compute at some point. Um,
Yeah, they're burning the wick at both ends, as I've brought up before. They've done it themselves. It's their
yeah,
fault. It was their business to lose. They don't understand the real autonomy that they have.
right.
They just take those positions. They do what they're told, and then they get their paycheck, and then the next day comes and they do the exact same thing all over again, whether again it's school teachers or administrators or superintendents, what have you. Because
Right.
as you said earlier, on all of the progress forms and building management plans and all of this nonsense paperwork that they fill out on a year in and year out basis, they've almost got to make it look like they're doing something new, different, and quote unquote innovative every single year.
Right.
When in fact, all they have to do is just succeed.
Right. Yeah. Right. And then what? It's like the anterior benefit of a good student is the society at large. We have this common good crap, and it's like, yeah, but what if we pump these kids full of actual knowledge, objective truth, and then we taught them how to learn? Because that's a problem too. I mean, we're not teaching them the way how to teach themselves, which essentially every sentient being has the ability to do. We just crush their little souls and send them out into the world and tell them they're going to make big they're going to do big things and they're going to change everything. And it's like, no, we need people who just want to like go get a job and pay taxes and like the minimal stuff, and not be criminals and not think that someone is going to provide something for you without you attempting to provide it for yourself. It's just the whole system is void of common sense, and it's obvious to me, and it's probably obvious to you, and I just don't see. I mean, teachers are notorious for complaining amongst themselves, but it's like nobody actually says like this whole thing stinks. Um, Only a few say that, and usually the people who say this thing stinks don't stick around to see it rot any further. It just drives them crazy, cognitive dissonance and stuff.
Yep.
Um, but I think when we look at the history, I mean, what Jefferson wrote on his schools is like Horace Mann and a couple of other jumped on early and said, oh, this is a good model and blah blah blah, but his model didn't even pass the Virginia State House to become Virginia's law. It kind of died as a bill, like most bills do. But I mean, in his writings, he says the state should never get into the business of schooling. He's like, it's way too big, and there's too much room for corruption. There's too much room for deceit. It should only be the parents. The parents should hire the teacher. The teacher should be local. You know, there's some benefit. I mean, he even calls at some point in his plan. He called it 100 because every 5-6 miles, every hundred or so people, they're gonna build a little school, and the superintendent of the schools is the one who kind of travels around and kind of is a resource to the teachers and the parents in the community, and he basically picks the two top students. But in Jefferson's writing, he says he's going to pick the two best students, the two brightest students from the rest of the rubbish. It's this idea that everybody needs to succeed, quote unquote succeed, and not define that succeeding um, from a practical perspective. As far as the system, yeah, we've taught a ton of kids how to read, but if you actually look at the data, um, you know they're actually not enjoying the reading, and they're not actually picking good things to read. They're it's almost like we teach them how to read, and then immediately we inoculate them against good literature, and we give them the hardest stuff to read, and then we do things like the Journeys program, um, which you literally read, and typically it's struggling readers that you're using this with. At least that was my experience. You read one article, which is like literally 3 pages long, and you read it all week. You read it for fluency, and you're marking down which words they're missing. You read it for understanding, and there's all these little schematic tests that you do throughout the week. I mean, the kid is pulling their hair out, by the end of the week, and they're bored out of their mind because it's just informational text. It doesn't pull the soul anywhere. It doesn't make them think about this whole big world and their place in it, and it's obnoxious, and it doesn't do what it needs to do. And obviously these programs come and go because somebody's making a ton of money on it. It's not for the benefit of the student. It's to the benefit of the publishing company or the people that have the copyright or the sales reps or whatever it is. It's just insane that we allow this to happen, um, with perfectly good children who can actually, you know, be a member of society, a functioning member of society that will actually help us when we're older. They'll actually hold the line for us. That's kind of the point. It's for us and our posterity. Um, anyway,
Yep, you're right. I love Jefferson's writings. I've brought him up. I've brought them up numerous times. Not everybody can be educated,
right,
and you should never force individuals who cannot be educated or don't want to be educated.
right,
So,
right. And you're educating them in a homogenous cookie cutter way. You're not tweaking it for as much talk as differentiation there is. It's impossible to do that. You don't have enough time in the day. You can't possibly do that. 30 kids in the classroom, 25 kids in the classroom. Um, it's just the expectation is just a not normal expectation. So, um, yeah, and 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 that's so Jefferson was always about decentralization or keeping things decentralized, and I'm all about that, especially if parental rights are respected. Which that's another problem with it's like professionals think, and not all of them. I mean, there's plenty of good people in the system, but there's just as many, I think, that think that they are actually taking the place of the family, um, which that's not a correct understanding. We're being allowed, um, we're being allowed the access to the child's intellect, and it's not ours to mess with. It's ours to build. It's ours to work with. It's ours to educate, and it's ours to ultimately, hopefully, finish off in high school and kind of send them on their way. But it is certainly not our place to tell them what to think and how to feel and certain emotions and these things. And I mean, they're all for tweaking the intellect of these kids, and I think that's a really bizarre thing, megalomaniacal.
yeah,
Um, just this idea that we're going to change the world by forcing these kids through these things. Um, it's child abuse. They're not allowed to be individuals, and I'm not huge on individualism as far as freedom of expression. Let's wear punk outfits and be emo and stuff like that. Like that, I think is kind of superficial.
right.
Um, it's more of a product of the homogenization of schooling and society. Um, and they're just little clubs anyway. But anyway, I mean, Catholic schools. So most institutions in the '60s, there was a bit of revolution. Some were some predated that. Some were a little later. We can think tanks like the Franklin School and all that stuff for kind of our institutions getting pulled this way or that. But one of the biggest institutions that was kind of holding the line for the longest time, that lasted through I don't know how many civilizations, I don't know how many kingdoms and governments and these sort of things, was the Catholic Church. Um, and and it was holding the line really well up until about 1960, and they called this thing called the Vatican Council or the Second Vatican Council. And in this, the same revolution that happened in society happened in the church. The the Pope, who was kind of running the show at that time, um, talked about aggiornamento and some other things. Basically, this opening up to the world, right? Where prior popes were very careful about, okay, this is the eternal truth right here, and we're going to protect it. And we might represent this truth to the world in a different way because the world is different now. But we're not going to mess with the actual truth and present it as a different thing. But since the 60s, that's been happening. And one of the problems with that is that it's had a horrible effect on the actual Catholic school. Um, so when you have revolution, it just everything gets kind of upended, and if you don't have something to kind of insert in its place, you get kind of this chaotic mess. They tried to insert something in its place, but there were plenty of conservatives and old guard that were still existing, that still had power, and so it was a very tumultuous time. But we see these days the product of the seminaries, because Pope Francis and some of the elderly cardinals and stuff in the Curia, they all went to the new seminaries. So we're talking full on, all sorts of crazy stuff going on there, as the news obviously says over and over. So this revolution that happened in the church actually had the effect on the Catholic schools. Was horrible. So the biggest problem is that when they started tweaking everything and messing with like the mass and all these things, the sisters, the religious, who had typically always done the teaching, um, they left. And if they didn't leave, they never showed up to become a religious, because everything was new and shiny, and there was no attraction. There was no eternal, man, this thing's been going on for a long time, and well, they've always said the same thing. So there was a lot of rupture in religious communities. So all these teaching orders vanished in less than a decade. Um, so the problem with that is you had all these schools in existence. So what happened by the 70s and the 80s was lay people started to teach, lay people started to be principals and assistant principals and superintendents and secretaries of education in dioceses, and on and on and on. And so all of the Catholic churches by the 80s, they're having their bottom line is going through the roof as far as their needs financially, because all these lay people have families. There's no more teaching orders. So I mean, back in the day, the teaching order, they would send 3 or 4 nuns, sisters, teaching sisters, um, to a certain area to maybe start a school or work a school, and these sisters, they would live in community. They would get the mother house would actually get their payment. Like, let's say if there's 4 of them, it could have been like maybe $5,000, $6,000 a year, and that'd go back to the mother house, and the mother house would subsidize their living expenses. But basically, that's all. They were religious. They took a vow of poverty. So it was, and on top of that, they were born to teach, because most of the time when you were a teaching religious, you were in one of these orders, it was deemed that you had the charism. You were given this by God. You were created for this purpose, to be poor and to be single and celibate and to be a teacher of children. It's a big difference when you get moms and dads and uncles and all these people involved. So tuition started to go through the roof as well, and um, and the problem is these lay people are bringing in all these modern ideas. The religious are gone, so all the old ways are gone. Um, and 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 then cost for the school, the actual plant inside of the school, is astronomical. It's becoming exponential. And then you get this problem where the Catholic identity of the school is being usurped by just worldly secular education. So all the modern methods, all that stuff. So anyway, so that's kind of what happened in the Catholic Church. But prior to that, it went for like almost 2,000 years. I mean, it started with the monasteries. Monks would take in orphans, that sort of thing. You have tons of examples of priests throughout the ages. John Bosco is one of them. Saint John Bosco, Saint Jean Baptiste LaSalle. These guys would take street urchins and make saints out of them, just because they were great teachers, and then there was a spiritual aspect to the education. So that's always kind of been a part of what I think is a really decent education is these eternal truths, these objective truths. One of the fascinating things is in 1929, one of the popes, Pope Pius XI, he wrote something called Divini Ilius Magistri, and that just means on the Christian education of youth. And I mean, he's an encyclical. These days encyclicals are 600 pages long, and they're saying we have to, take care of the earth, and you can't run air conditioners and all this other nonsense. And that's not the point of the church. All the Green New Deal and that sort of, that's not the church. The church is, this is what's always been taught. This is why it's been taught. Let me re-explain to a world that's forgotten, essentially. So they were always the keepers of truth. But this guy, I mean, he says some of the craziest stuff that you would think, man, what? I mean, just the fact that he could come up with some of these truths. I'll give you a couple of them.
Yeah.
So, and sometimes popes, they'll compile stuff from past popes or saints or whoever, really, a cardinal here, a cardinal there, this Christian here, Christian there, anybody who had the light, the grace to speak on the subject. So this is a quote from Leo the 13th, who was mid 19th century, or I guess more late 19th century. He said that without proper religious and moral instruction, every form of intellectual culture will be injurious, for young people not accustomed to respect God will be unable to bear the restraint of a virtuous life, and never having learned to deny themselves anything, they will easily be incited to disturb the public order. So, I mean, they're just saying in the 19th century, mind you, that without this foundational truth, and I'm not trying to preach God or anything like that, but just that we've lost the teaching of truths. But without this fundamental truth of just human beings being who they are, nobody's going to know how to respond in future. I mean, the public order is going to be completely, it's going to be chaos in the streets, and that's just something that we lose sight of when we're chugging away at our normal, education jobs. These people need to function at some point, and how am I actually helping in that functioning?
Yeah, it creates a real internal lifelong struggle within the individual because the individual never figures out who God intended them to be.
Right.
Because the system is telling them you all have to be the same. You
Right.
have to do this, you have to stand here, you all have to read this, you should all write this way.
Right.
And then at the
Right.
exact same time, they're perversing
Right.
individuality to the point where everybody then needs to be like one of their other peers.
Right.
Well, your peers dress like this, or your peers act like this. So now you need to, you need to accept the way that they're doing things, rather than having the person actually focus on themselves.
Right.
It's awful.
Right. And have that self-knowledge.
Yeah.
Knowing where you're going to fail before you fail, or knowing where you need extra help is quite a good thing to know. Knowing what you don't need to work on, that's a good thing. You don't have to waste your time.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, it's but having that kind of objective truth where we're not making it up as we go. This is actually how it was. Is, I think, really important, especially with the little kids. 2 + 2 is always 4. If you start talking, something other than that, then we should all have a discussion that's probably not appropriate. That's wrong.
Yeah. 2 + 2 is not racist.
Right. That's what? Oh, he said 2 + 2 is not transgender. It was the governor, the lieutenant governor of North Carolina, the big black dude.
Yeah.
He said that at some point.
Good for
2
him.
+ 2 is not transgender, and that's exactly it. We're messing with their intellect. We're saying you must and forget it. Let's forget about math right now. Let's talk about these other people and how you have to welcome them and all this. And it's like, just say be nice. Just teach us how to be nice, and that's it. Don't teach us why we need to think a certain way when you're kind of flying by. You're just flying by the seat of your pants. You're making it up.
And you don't even
anyway,
have to. You don't even have to teach them to be nice. You just hold them accountable for not being nice. If they break the law,
exactly.
if you break the law, you kick them out. That's up to the
right.
Again, that's the Jeffersonian approach. The family is supposed to teach them about feelings. The school is supposed to teach them about content.
Right. Well, and so some other stuff from this encyclical, which is kind of along the same lines. He says, for in this work, the teacher, whether public or private, has no absolute right of his own, but only such as has been communicated to him by others. So basically, the child belongs to someone else, and you have no right over the child other than what these people say your rights are. When we have a school board member, I don't know if you saw it, but some I don't know, it was one of the Mid-Atlantic states. It wasn't Virginia, but after all this stuff, this continual stuff with Loudoun County, and then he's got this op-ed that essentially says, like, well, parents, you do not provide my salary. You are asking us things that you know nothing about. Like this really condescending, dripping with condescension. Yeah. And I'm like, it's an eternal truth that child belongs to the parent. And for all of human history, there were orphans, but now we stuff them into the state, and we can see how that works. They're wards of the state. Somebody's got to do it, obviously, but when you limit the field otherwise, and you don't allow the Catholic Church or the Baptists or whoever to help because they're a religious organization and there's not going to be any collusion between the state and the government, it's just common sense dictates that that's probably not going to be a good thing. When the post office is going out of business and we're handing children over to the state because they're the best option, we really need to have these conversations, because that child does not belong to the state. It doesn't. It's never belonged to the state. No matter how crazy that child's life is with the parents, we have to provide multiple options. There has to be something else. Anyway, and he keeps continuing. Every method of education founded, wholly or in part, on the denial or forgetfulness of original sin and of grace, and relying on the sole powers of human nature, is unsound. So it doesn't matter what you're teaching or how you're teaching it. If you're not digging into those truths and presenting them, and allowing the child to come to their own, if you say this is who God is, and then you allow the child a few years before you really call them to the carpet on it, that's a really, that's really generous. Instead of testing them out in the unit, 2 weeks later, and then they forget about it until the review at the end of the year, and then, they regurgitate all these facts that, it's just not, the fundamental truths have to be taught first, and then the child has to come to an understanding of those fundamental truths, or else the whole enterprise is shot.
And it becomes very, very difficult for them to comprehend anything new that they're learning because they have nothing to relate it to.
Right.
Like you said, there's no foundation of any truth of any kind. And,
right.
Heaven forbid, again, you bring up God, even in a public school setting, you'll get your arm chopped off.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And of course, the reason that they can't allow that to happen is because it disproves science and it disproves history.
Right.
So that blows up. That blows up two complete subjects.
Right.
That are allegedly foundational to the entire framework of what they believe to be public education, and really, it's just scientism is all they're teaching. And then was it Voltaire? History is just a group of men who gather in a dark room and agree on a lie.
Right.
That's it. That's why it's so hard for them to recall accurate information, or any information, and it's because what's being taught to them is a falsehood.
Right.
The truth is easy to remember. It just has,
right.
But if it's not taught, they have no choice.
exactly. Right, and even Saint Paul in Romans. I mean, he specifically says, you can experience creation, and at some point you're going to say, well, where the heck did all this stuff come from? Where did the stuff, the matter? You can say what came first, chicken or egg, or acorn or tree or whatever, but the matter, the actual stuff that constitutes that acorn or that tree, where did it come from? And that's when your little teeny tiny soul starts to realize that that there may be, and if there's anything that this world needs, it's the understanding that there's something bigger and more important, whatever it is, materialism, vaccines, scientism, all of these things. If there's one thing that we all need to start thinking about, is that we are actually pretty small, and we rely not only on one another, but we rely on graces. We rely on this other thing that that we should probably be thinking about, instead of constantly thinking about ourselves. Because I mean, if you look at I guess I should change how I speak about the modern education system. It's really actually quite successful, if you think about it. If they actually wanted to, if they were actually setting out for what they intended in the first place, when compulsory education started getting rolled out, and busing and all these different things. I mean, if they were looking for failure, they've like done really, really well. It's actually probably one of the best enterprises that that we could have, if that's what they intended.
And
Which hopefully, some of them probably did, but I don't want to, judging intent is different than judging the actual action.
Yeah, I think their plan is pretty clear, and well, in my humble opinion, I guess. But if you can make something, and then you can make that thing that you've made fail, with the intent of having government continuously create programs, quote unquote, to fill an alleged void that you created, then ultimately the entire thing is controlled by government. Yeah. So you've got government money laundering, and you've got government with the overreach that they have over education, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing all of the moves that a school teacher would be able to make on their own time, with their own freedom, be completely dictated to government rules, and groups and programs that school districts pay for, that comes from someone else who's just trying to make a dollar.
Right.
And it's all funded by government, and it's backed by government, and they say, oh, you have a problem reading? Well, wouldn't you know it? We've got all these indoctrination programs over here on how to make you a better, reading student. And then they shove it on reading teachers, whether they want it or not.
Right.
So
yeah. Most don't.
That's right.
They're like, this is absurd how many different programs we have to deal with. And I mean, forget about the actual materials. When these sales reps are, I mean, there's workshops, you got to fly people in, there's, whole group instruction on how to roll these things out, and they make twice as much money easily. But yeah, it's a racket for sure. It's a big racket. Yeah. So when I I'm speaking about Catholic education, that's essentially what happened to Catholic education. You have this Pope in 1929 that literally puts it all in a book, a really short book, by the way, on what it takes to raise good children, and he kind of lays it all out. When I read that, it was my first year at a Catholic school, and I was a little disillusioned because I was seeing a lot of the same problems in both public and Catholic, and so I picked that up, and I ended up talking to my wife, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. This is what a Catholic school needs. This is what we should be reading every day as teachers at a Catholic school. This is but then I think, well, only 4 of the 12 teachers are actually Catholic. I mean, the principal is nominal Catholic, and it just didn't. The zeal was already gone, when we talk about, Matthew 28, go therefore and make disciples of all nations, you know, literally 12 people did that. And, they had help, but that's who he chose. And to think that, a small minority can have that sort of change is something that we should be thinking of. So we had the perfect number of teachers. We could have been easily getting these 400 something kids in and out every day, and we could have been doing what was said to be done in the first place. Through true education. Um, so anyway, I read this thing and I was like, oh my gosh, this is 1929, and he's talking about, oh, be careful of the movies and the vile books and a couple of other things, where I'm like, gosh, he's saying vile in 1929. Good night. We're so far past that.
Yep.
So that's kind of, that's essentially, it was like the last deposit of writing on education. And a lot of the people paying attention now, and it's interesting. I was just talking to a priest this weekend who started a couple of schools, and he said something interesting that I'd never come across. But he essentially said, all the ruptures in the '60s, actually made education purely science. But before that, it was both science and art. So he called it the art of arts. Sculpting the mind. Bringing up a child in intelligence and wisdom. That's the art of arts, and we've essentially lost the art. It's been ruptured. It's gone. But the science is still there. So the science has kind of grown into this, all devouring, rational thing. But there is an art to it that we forgot, and we should be thinking about that art. And I think you in particular, when I listen to your other podcasts, I mean, I think you would understand that perfectly fine. I mean, when you say things like "I was put on this earth to teach," that I would think that is an indication that you have a little flame of that art. Like there's going to have to be a restoration at some point. I'm daydreaming these days about attempting a one room schoolhouse, and getting McGuffey's reader, and just you're getting promoted on merit, and we're not doing the age. You're magically in another grade next year, no matter what we teach you or what your grades are, and I think it'd be fun to actually try it. And I think if things were to come crashing down, I think it would be regional. I mean, I'm lucky to be in Florida right now under the leadership that we're under. Because masking and vaxes and all that stuff has never even. I mean, the Catholic schools. That's what's crazy. The bishops in the Catholic schools. I mean, they're all masking. I mean, not anymore, but they actually mandated masks, but DeSantis never mandated it. If a diocese did, he came in and said, "Hey, you better cut it out, or I'm going to sue you into submission," sort of stuff.
Right.
No,
I daydream about the exact same thing. I honestly believe that it is the only way forward, and I applaud everybody who homeschools. I applaud the students that are literate enough to teach themselves, because I advocate for that every chance I can get. That's because, again, that's the quintessential opposite of everything that we see or hear about in the public education system. How dare a human being,
right,
who knows how to read and write, actually learn how to look things up on their own when they have a question?
right, and then all you hear outside of that school is, well, we can just look it up on the internet. We can. I mean, this vast knowledge. I mean, some of it's dangerous, but I mean, I can. I mean, being Catholic, I can look up literally any encyclical on the Vatican website all the way until they were paying attention. I mean, we're talking like over 1,000 years of this stuff, where I can go back and this dude says, Pope such and such says the exact same thing that this guy said 500 years later, and that says something to me about that. It's that is probably closer to the eternal truth than what I'm getting now. But these kids have this on offer at any time, and all you got to do is teach them how to discern. I mean, that's what
Yep.
Aristotle said. I mean, literally, the learning is you're looking at two things and you're figuring out the differences between them and the similarities. That's literally learning. So, I mean, we just totally lose that, and we do it all over control. We do it all over this mass. I mean, I got 1,100 kids at my middle school. It's all it is three stinking grades, and we got 1,100 kids, and there's two in town. And I mean, you can't possibly do it right. You can't. And then if you look at all these charter schools that are really successful, it's because of discipline. It's because when the kid gets out of line, the handbook in the charter school is much stronger than the public school, because the public, we seem to just like, okay, well, we'll just take that abuse and we'll make this one, two, three, four people. They can just take over this entire classroom and ruin it for everybody else. No offense to them, because I mean, I don't know their position in society. I don't know what they're struggling with. I'm sure they're struggling from a lot, but just the idea of them struggling and allowing them to misbehave and allowing them to co-opt the entire learning process it's absurd. It's not just, and that's just what's going to happen. It's all going to go down to the lower. It's going to be the lowest case scenario, where the individual who performs the least will actually skew. It won't be the leader of the room, because they're doing everything you ask and they're just sitting there getting their way all day long. It's gonna be the lower students. But but yeah, I don't think mass education. It's the way they've spent on it. It's just not, it's not practical, or it's not commonsensical either. So yeah, I'm all about looking at, because I mean, it would be great if you could figure out the one room schoolhouse again, and you could update some of the material, because I mean, obviously some of the material would have to be updated, not the curriculum, but the actual material. um I mean, it would be easy if you could franchise that off, not as a business model, but just like, this is what we've done and this is what was successful. And there were 190,000 of these at one point in North America. It wasn't a little thing, and it was ridiculously successful. And I
Yeah.
mean, it churned out all sorts of people who I mean, they were literally 8 and 9 years like into the schooling, um, and they're doing calculus and all this other stuff, and they're essentially graduating. And the best part is, the family at any time could say, "I need you home today," and then the kid would stay home, and there's no truancy. There's no like, how dare you, because it's all based on merit. It's all based on you knowing something. It's not you missing the work we did yesterday. It's you pick up where you leave off, and you are a product of your family, and you belong to them. And it makes so much more sense to me.
Yeah.
Right now we're kind of looking. There's a couple of guys in town, and we're all Catholic, and we're kind of playing with the idea. And it's something that would have to be funded privately, because you can't do some of this stuff, um, with just squawking, like you're a quote unquote private school as defined by the state. They get their fingers in there too much. Um,
The,
and
the
and
the
right,
the the recommendation that I've made, and I don't know if it's viable or not. I think it is. It certainly sounds like it would be, and it must exist. Um, it's the business of taking a homeschooling accredited model and simply bringing that into a building.
yeah, you've said, yeah, like a Becca
Right.
before. Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
you have the parents purchase the program, parents pay the teachers to teach the material, and you're killing two birds with one stone in the sense, because they can still utilize a place for their child to go and learn while they're working, if in fact both parents are working or a single parent is working.
right.
And then,
Well, and that's another thing that needs to be said too. I mean, back in the day, and I'm not like raging for the 1950s again, because there were plenty of problems societally. But I mean, just the fact that we need two incomes now just to get by
Yeah.
is that has to be said too, because there's families that are actually now dependent on the system that exists just as a holding tank. Forget the education of the child. They need somebody to watch the kid, and it's essentially a free option. You're already paying for it with property tax or whatever. But that would be good, and you could use that curriculum, and that curriculum could be merit based too. You wouldn't have to, they're at some point they're just going to be working on they're going to work themselves, because we have a couple of students that would be homes or high school, and there would be transcript problems if they weren't um, if we weren't accredited, which I have no desire to work with any accreditation. I mean,
No.
the
Yeah.
stuff that I see in public school is insane. And all of those, it's really funny because every single um, at some point, these accreditation companies and these textbook companies said, "Man, we can double our money if we just sell all this crap to Catholic schools too." Christian schools, um, Seventh Day Adventist schools. All of it, it's like it's all about the bottom line. So all of the same thing. So like Missouri is where I was a principal, and literally it's the same exact accreditation, um, with like one extra category added for religion, and then they call it the Missouri non public school accreditation association. But it's all the same stuff. Like, I looked at it, it's the same requirements. So you're saying this rural Catholic school that's existed way before um, public school existed. um, the priest started a high school because he wanted a football team. So that was the school essentially, and the public school started 2 years after that, and they actually played football for his football team because they didn't have enough kids there. So it was like the exact opposite. But you can't tell me that this public association of accreditation is now going to dictate to me what this school that has culture, that it runs like a family and it runs like a top. I mean, we struggled for money, but that's across the board everywhere does that, so anyway, but that is a good idea. I mean, you could easily use a program that is doing, they're connecting all the dots for you, and you just plug it in, and transcripts will come and everything.
That's it. Yeah. I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
You're not reinventing the wheel. Theoretically,
Right.
the building where you're doing the teaching isn't technically a school; it's a home.
Right.
So
Right.
and parents are sending their children to that home, and then yeah, I mean
Yeah.
that's in my make believe world. That's that seems to be the thing. But I do know for a fact that does exist,
Yeah.
and they even utilize the Hillsdale College model as well, and it's accredited, and they just build their own building, and
Yep.
then they the parents pay into the program, and that's how they fund themselves. But this is going to be a bit of a naive question, but let me ask you this: from your Catholic background, do they move um, Catholic school administrators around like they move ministers and priests around a church? You know how like they'll be
Yeah.
around for only a certain number of years and then they move away and then somebody else comes in. Do they do the same thing with school administrators?
They don't, um, but the usually the supervisor is the priest. So when the priest gets moved, there is an effect on the school. Um, Most of the time, the principal, it's like every other education administration, other than the move. It's just a job that has become a monster. So it used to be all of these people existed in a parish that would assist. So there was always a caretaker that took care of the school and the parish. There was always a couple of priests. When we don't have a lot of priests, we only got one, and they got to run a school and a parish. We're talking some decent money and a lot of managing people. And some of the people are, it can get ticked off pretty easy. It's just how the faith is. Sometimes when you're dealing with truths, people get angry quickly. So anyway, so I think the job of principal, they might not. There's a ton of turnaround, but it's not because they're moving. It's because the job has become such a large job with so many moving parts, um, and the money hasn't followed, right? Because it would have been fine if well, I gotta now we have to deal with maintenance and all that other stuff, but just the job. And then if you look across the country, the age of the schools, the physical plant of the schools sometimes has a big effect on administration, because it's a constant losing game with money, and you can't really innovate. You can't or innovate as far as make classrooms more attractive, you know build some sort of ancillary programs that will assist the teachers and what they do. So I would say they don't move, but they don't get moved, but they move on pretty quick. Every 2 years, 3 years, unless you have something where the guy or the gal who is now principal has lived there, in that town, and that's the parish they went to. That kind of situation happens sometimes, and they'll be there for 20, 30 years,
Right.
you know. But there's a lot of moving.
Yeah, it sounds similar to the public school system as well. I mean, as you know, they pluck administrators in the public school system, whether they be principals or assistant principals, and they rotate them around, and they seem to think that that's somehow going to change something,
Right.
and it doesn't.
It doesn't. And that's one thing too, when it comes down, at the beginning of this, when we started talking, I was saying, I'm one of these weirdo Catholics that goes to the old mass. What's really interesting is when you get into the politics of the church, and how this progressive idea has kind of taken hold, just like the rest of society. Um, but we'd have a pretty decent priest, and they'd be saying the Latin Mass, and you'd be surprised at how many young families come around for that Mass. But the priest would be moved, and they'd be moved across town, 2 hours away, wherever, because some of these dioceses are pretty big. And there goes the Latin Mass, and then the new guy, it was a crapshoot whether they were going to even hold the line like the previous one did, or whether they're just addicted to progress, and they're going to change this and that. They're going to bring and programs. It's like they're in seminary. They're put through essentially, it's a management school. It's not like this is how you teach the faith, and we're going to work on you and your spiritual journey, and we're going to make sure you're set. It's like, okay, this is accounting. This is they're basically training CPAs, and that's what's important to bishops, I guess, or these seminaries. But it ends up having a negative effect. So you'll get a good priest every now and then. I mean, their teaching is solid as a rock, and you can rely on it. But I would say oftentimes you have someone in the middle, or somebody who, I mean, in the middle, meaning like they say things that make you think like, okay, that's good. But then they're also in the bag for, new. And I'm a reactive conservative. I see the previous generation, everything that they did, and I say, that's not for, I'm a family man. I'm going to make sure we have good citizens. I'm going to love these guys. I'm going to make sure if my wife wants to stay home with them and teach them, I'm going to make that happen. That's just what you have to do. Um, and it's been great how we've done it. Like I love my wife. We have a great relationship. Um, but that's not the case. I look around. A lot of our friends, they're society just is not. It's very fragile these days. Um, so anyway, long story short, I think, or long story long, progress in itself is good, but progress for progress's sake is 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 not a way to live. It's certainly not a way to run a school or a church.
Let me ask you about, the mask wearing and the jab related stuff that you've seen within your school system. Um, how is that impacted what's going on, and what's been the perspective there?
So I think it is not. What's so weird is I've been in Florida for 2 years now, a little over 2 years, and so I can't compare it to anybody else's experience. So what I say might, you know when we relate it to other experiences, it might not be the same. But I haven't really seen. Uh, it's obviously a problem when um, when they're when you're not allowed to question something and say, I'm not sure that's for me. Can you give me a little more info? And then they're like, no, we can't, and you must take this. That to me, that would make me skeptical. And I'm not. My family's thinking a different way as far as my folks. My sister, and other people I know. But it just when I'm skeptical, it just stops me dead in my tracks, and I don't go any further. Um, so in the schools, I mean, Florida as a whole, we did a pretty hard close for a couple of weeks. The local people tried to shut everything down, and it worked to an extent, but the weather being what it was, and their ability not to enforce it, other than the capitalist enforcing, all the mom and pops stores close, and let's put everybody through Walmart. Walmart can be open, but you know what? We're just going to close. We're going to close one door, and we're going to put the entire population of this neighborhood through one door in Walmart for 5 months straight. It's just that's counterintuitive. If it's a virus, unless you're planning that, you would want people to spread out, but that's not what happened. So we had a lot of local people in Florida that kind of started to piecemeal some things and really take some power onto themselves. But that first summer, I guess it was more towards the fall, DeSantis started to really say, like, things aren't lining up here. And he started to say things like, we're never closing again, and then he started to slowly, he had to go after some of the larger counties and cities first, but he started to sue them. He started to go after the health departments, and he started to go after the school boards and suggest, Scott Atlas was saying his thing, and Zelenko, and so there were plenty of people who had already started to kind of speak how to deal with this thing. And I think he was looking, and Mark McDonald, who's a psychologist out in California, he too um, was kind of consulted on it, and he was primarily the mask guy. Um, but DeSantis was the one. See, and this is where I've had to come to terms with being conservative. As a conservative, um, I've always thought like, okay, small government, small government, small government, small government. I never thought, we have this concept of Big Brother watching over us and Big Brother getting into our business and all that other stuff. But I certainly like DeSantis being my big brother, knocking people around on my behalf. It Government does serve a function. Its size. The central government in our country right now, it's way too big. It's this huge thing, but having a man like DeSantis with a system that we have is really a godsend. It's not. It's not what people. I mean, Florida's been a I mean, living in Florida has been like a grace for us because it's never been as bad as literally almost anywhere in the world, in our experience. Now, there are some things, my first week back at school, they did a huge rollout of the vaccine, but it was, it was on the up and up as much as possible. Parental consent was sought. There were waivers, all this stuff. I would say probably maybe a third of the school did it, kids and staff, but most didn't. Um, so yeah, so I think it's been when taken relatively with what I hear other people are dealing with, it's I mean, certainly not a nothing burger, but it hasn't been a really difficult thing. We actually had one of our children at the end, not at the end, but a couple of months into the lockdown, and we were so worried because nobody knew. They were telling my wife that, okay, well, if you have a fever and you have coronavirus, you're going to have to quarantine, and so they're telling her that they're going to take the kid for 14 days away from her, and both of them will have to be in the hospital, but they can't see each other, and it's like, no, that doesn't make any sense at all. That's totally, and this is what they were kind of, who knows if that was the truth, but that's what was kind of said to us as that's kind of standard operating procedure at the time. So, I mean, me on the way we're going to deliver the baby, and, I'm popping, ibuprofen, and I got the AC cranked. It was like April, but the lady at the, because I couldn't have a fever or else I wouldn't be able to even go in the hospital to watch my kid be born. So, I think the emergency room tech, like, I think she clocked me at like 95.4 degrees, and she took it like 3 or 4 times and was really freaked out because, like, I should have hypothermia and stuff, but I didn't. Anyway, so I was there to see the birth of my kid, but what's so funny is the day before that, and this is April, was the day that the medical people, the medical staff, doctors, nurses, everybody at the hospital, that was the first day that masks were actually mandated. This is like, 4 months in. And now they're mandated for them, the health workers. We didn't have to mask ourselves. And then the masks came a couple of weeks later for everybody, It's like they were just making it up the whole time, But we could see it kind of coming, and it wasn't as severe as other places, for sure. Because we got, DeSantis and a couple of other people who played some key. I mean, I'm in Matt Gaetz's district too, and his father used to be a state senator in this area, and that family still has plenty of clout. So it was relatively minimal, and now it's like nothing. I mean, there's like maybe I got like 5 or 6 kids that are masking, all day long out of 125. So yeah, it's nothing. I mean, there's a couple of teachers that mask, but pretty much we see each other's smiles all day long, or frowns, because we're in public education.
That's incredible. And hey, you were just a stone's throw away from Andrew Gillum. So talk about dodging a big a really big, dangerous, crack-filled bullet right there.
It would have been. I mean, Florida would have been one of those states that everybody's leaving.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Everybody would have had to go to Texas or something.
100%. Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.